You are tuning into the LEHI Low Ego, High Impact Mindset podcast. I'm your host, Volkan Emre, along with a dynamic team of Kellogg School of Management alums. We are here on a shared mission to uncover the mindset that drives impact and success. On LEHI, we have thought-provoking conversations with incredibly successful entrepreneurs, business leaders, and investors from around the globe. We uncover the mindset that drives them, allowing them to make a high impact without losing themselves to ego. Now, let's get started with today's episode. Welcome to today's episode with Jennifer Clark, a leading senior executive with a lasting positive impact on a wide variety of industries from cannabis, healthcare, consumer goods, and technology. Jennifer is the Chief Operating Officer at Margo Network, a private equity-owned fintech company in the cryptocurrency space. She was the COO of Flowers for Dreams, the largest florist in the Midwest, and she was the SVP of Operational Excellence at a leading cannabis company called Cresco Labs, where she significantly contributed to the transformation of the organization by driving revenue growth from $10 million to over $800 million and led the company through an IPO from 50 employees to over 3,500 employees over the course of 4 years. Prior to leading Cresco Labs, Jennifer had a progressive career at Abbott and AbbVie for over 20 years. Besides her impactful professional career, Jennifer is a leading community service leader. She is a member of CHIEF, an organization designed for senior women leaders to strengthen their leadership journey. Jennifer is the president of the board of directors of Kellogg Women at EMBA, a Northwestern initiative that serves as a catalyst for strategic advancement of Kellogg's women leaders. Jennifer is a distinguished alum of the Kellogg School of Management's Executive MBA program, and she holds a bachelor's degree in biology from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. This episode is co-hosted by Kelly Meagle, a seasoned marketer, growth expert, senior executive, and a distinguished member of the Kellogg Executive MBA alumni. We are recording this podcast in the Allen Center building of the Kellogg School of Management in Evanston, Illinois. Jennifer, thank you very much for coming on the LEHI Mindset podcast. It's great to have you here. And there are so many questions that I wanted to ask you, wish that I asked you during the program. And this will be really an amazing episode, in my opinion. And thank you very much again, Kelly, for your participation as a co-host. It's really great to have you here. So with that, we have some rapid fire questions, and we're going to be asking them one by one to get to know you a little bit better. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Coffee. Decaf.
That's an insight all on its own. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Do you have dogs?
No.
No? Okay. Mountains or beaches?
Mountains.
Text or call?
Text.
Music or podcast?
Both.
Oh.
Is that allowed?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
PC or Mac?
Mac.
Drive or fly?
Fly.
What's worse, dishes or laundry?
Dishes.
And why?
There's just not much other things to do while you're doing the dishes. I rarely do them. Thankfully, my husband does most of the dishes. But laundry, you can listen to a podcast, get some other stuff done. But yeah, dishes.
Okay.
Yeah, not enjoyable.
Wow. And actually, you are in the minority. Like usually people have been saying so far laundry is worse. Mm-hmm. I have a data set of maybe 25 so far. Very few people say actually dishes. So I find it like very interesting.
There's an organization factor to laundry, and there's a finite thing when you put them all away. It feels very satisfactory. Whereas dishes, they don't immediately get done. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, the process. You like the process.
Even if you dry them, I mean, they put them away, but then you still got to put them away later once they're drying. Or
Wow, you like the process aspect.
I've never thought
of it.
about this,
Sense
but
for your
maybe.
career path too.
Yeah.
What is the first app you open up in the morning?
Email, which is probably not a good thing, but yes, email.
Also super common. So thank you very much for the rapid fire question session. I think maybe we may have forgot one more. Pancakes or waffles?
Neither.
Wow.
Okay.
Not carbs, not anything like that in the morning, or what?
Not really. I guess I'd probably pick pancakes, but I'm not really much of a sweets person. So I would say in the morning it's eggs, bacon. Yeah, stick to more
Classic
of those things.
breakfast.
Sweet potato fries.
Okay.
Just unusual things.
Okay.
More savory, yeah.
So, Jennifer, can you start by giving our listeners a brief introduction to your background and your journey from Abbott to today?
Sure. So, believe it or not, I actually started my career as a scientist, which a lot of people nowadays don't know. My undergrad degree was actually in biology pre-med. So, I started as a scientist at Abbott, kind of learned the basics of operations, largely manufacturing, production, testing, and quality assurance, and eventually moved more up into technical roles, technical product development, and eventually became a technical product lead for cancer, hepatitis, and thyroid products. But I think being a scientist at Abbott, a lot of people either went up more of a technical track, becoming lead scientists, researchers. I found that I actually really enjoyed the business aspects and kind of pivoted and started working more towards, I would say, business excellence or operational excellence roles. I got my Lean Six Sigma certification, green belt, and moved into more like change management groups, et cetera. And so I really found that I enjoyed that more and decided to pursue more of operations management versus the scientific technical track. I had the unique opportunity to start what would now be called a couple entrepreneurial endeavors where we were starting a brand new function with kind of a clean slate of here's what we want to achieve out of this, but let's see if it's possible. And ultimately, can this lead to some efficiencies and cost reduction? And I was part of this group where we really built it soup to nuts, right? What's the technology? What's the workflow? What's the organization we need? The people we need, and got this organization up and running. And then eventually was one of the leaders. But I really loved what I call creative ops. Like there's not already an existing playbook. And you have to leverage what you know about operations to design a brand new operations. I had a couple endeavors of those, but there's only so many of those within Abbott AbbVie because it's a much more established company. And actually, I should have said I skipped from Abbott to AbbVie because the company went through a split, and I actually ended up on the pharmaceutical AbbVie side during that split. But I found that I loved that entrepreneurial spirit, and that's ultimately why I decided to leave and join more true startup organizations. But that's kind of the path that led me there.
So Jen, it's really interesting. You're taking us through like a very traditional background to these massive leaps into new startups and all these interesting places. What was the transition like? What made you take those risks?
That's a good question. I think for me, having some of that foundational operational knowledge under my belt was great, but where I really drew energy from was these innovative opportunities where you're kind of building the plane while you're flying it, right? You're within a very established umbrella, but you have to figure out what this brand new organization looks like. There was also an opportunity where we were forming a brand new division and taking many different organizations together into a new one. And I think with that made me realize you don't always have to have the answers specifically carved out. It's very different than coming into a role where someone says, we're going to train you in how to do the role, and then you just have to execute against that. This is, we're defining what the role is and what the organization even looks like and the people and the technology we need and the processes, and you're developing it as you go, right? And so I think for me, that made it safe to pivot, because if I can do this and there's no playbook and there's no one training me, I'm figuring it out as I go with other very talented people. It made me realize, whereas I had a lot of friends who really wanted to stay at Abbott and AbbVie, and you can make a very successful career there in pivoting and, get a pension and a 401k and retire, pretty well. I realized, even though I've been here for 20 years, I'm not sure I want to be a lifer here because I think there's other things that I can tackle and probably achieve and develop more in my career. And for me, that was going to be elsewhere and trying to make a bigger impact into a much smaller organization that I hope would grow versus what I was starting to feel was a little bit of a, small fish in a big pond versus being the big fish in a small pond and having some more direct impact on the company versus where I was sitting at Abbott.
Yeah, it's really interesting about being able to have impact, but you also chose industries that were sort of unique. Can you talk through a little bit of your decisions into jumping into industries that maybe some people would be curious or, not as optimistic as you were about them?
Yeah, so some of that is luck. Like I said, I started off as a scientist, but ultimately ended up moving to operations. During that time, I was sort of thinking about leaving Abbott, AbbVie, and my passion at the time was really food and beverage, but how that plays into health and wellness certainly has a medical, scientific component to it. So when I was at Abbott, I actually was going to school part-time to also get a culinary degree. And I liked sort of that blend of culinary arts, food and beverage with science. And I had a recruiter reach out to me through LinkedIn of all places. I know, your network is very important, but I actually was one of these people that randomly had a recruiter reach out to me. And she was interested in my background in science and operations and now this culinary degree to pivot over to cannabis. And I very clearly remember one night reading this message, and my husband and I are about ready to start a movie. And I was like, hey, listen to this. This recruiter reached out to me about this role in cannabis. And I just was like, that's so odd. He's like, that's very amazing. You should definitely reach back out to her. And I was like, what? I'm not going to pivot over to cannabis because I think in some ways in my mind at that time, I wanted to move over to food and beverage. And that just wasn't on my radar, even though a lot of people at that time were looking to pivot in. I was fortunate that I responded back, had a conversation with a recruiter, which led to a conversation with HR, eventually the founders and the COO of this cannabis company that was starting out of Chicago. And I ultimately decided to make the pivot. I really loved the people, and going to see the facility was very eye-opening. It was a real legit operations, right? Agriculture, growing the plants. I think the lab really sold me. There were a lot of chemists, biochemists, and I think that's a lot of parts that people don't see when they think about cannabis is there's a lot of chemistry and technical and scientific knowledge that's required when you get to extraction, formulation of products. And then they also had the food element because there was a kitchen and edibles manufacturing, which really played upon my culinary degree as well. And so I ultimately took the risk and made the leap, and it was really great. I think part of it is just being, I like an adventure and sort of pioneer and sort of laying the foundation for something new. Again, a playbook that hasn't been built before, and you're really trying to pivot and build the playbook as you go. So it was one of the best moves I actually made in my career.
I mean, it's really fascinating because most people wouldn't be able to sort of take that risk and take the leap. But Jen, you're doing it again. You're doing it again.
I know.
Tell us, if I'm allowed to let the cat out of the bag, which I think you've posted already, tell us about your next endeavor.
I did officially post something yesterday. So even though I was not looking to make a career pivot this year, because I've made a couple pivots the last couple years, and after launching my fractional COO consulting business, I really wanted to just lean in year two and really focus there because it's been very enjoyable. But I was approached about an opportunity in a brand new industry again, in fintech, and specifically in cryptocurrency, and a space I also thought I would never really be in. But after several conversations and really learning about the business and learning more about the industry, despite my objection to really making a move this year, one thing led to another, and I officially actually started this last week on Monday.
Congratulations. That's
Congratulations,
really
and the LinkedIn post was really beautiful. So thank you for your authenticity and transparency. It was I really enjoyed the LinkedIn post. So, and good luck.
You.
I'm sure you will be very successful in that role. Let's talk about mindset and being an operational leader. So after Abbott AbbVie, you transitioned into senior leadership roles at growing organizations. How do you maintain balance and handle the pressures that come with being at the top of the operational leadership ladder?
That's a good question. I would say overall, I try not to get caught up in what I would call hearsay and opinions, right? The way I generally lead is very facts and data driven, context and decision making. And I've thought about this in my career in how I may go about things slightly different than maybe other senior leaders. And I honestly attribute that a lot to coming from an analytical background. I mean, I am a scientist by training, even though I'm now in operations, in a lot of ways, strategy overall. But where people I find sometimes get very worked up, or I heard this or this is going on, I'm usually the person in the room who's like, okay, what did you hear? What did someone say? What's going on? And I take that into consideration, but I really try to separate what I call like facts from fiction. And in a lot of ways, I'm like, okay, what is the data saying? Let's get the facts. And oftentimes where people maybe get worked up, right, or make some rash or quick decisions, I probably am a little more methodical and sort of going through the facts and the data, and then leveraging, the other information that I'm gathering to decide where we're going in the future. And I think in some ways, when you're leading from that perspective, it takes a lot to sort of rattle me, I guess, in some ways, because you're just relying on the facts and the data and the information's in front of you and going from there without getting caught up in what a lot of times I think causes churn and a lot of inefficiencies in, decision making and where you're trying to go in a company.
In the mindset that you just talked about, has it evolved like over time, or have you been always like this?
I think for the most part, I've always been like this. I just think as I've moved up an organization, those stakes get higher. And so I find sometimes that when you're surrounded by that more, I feel like I'm more even anchored in and sort of that voice of reason when there is sometimes like chaos going on. It's just like getting the facts. I can remember situations where we had some crisis situations like leading product quality, and someone's concerned that there's a severe product quality issue going on, right? And again, things are moving so fast and furious where people are trying to figure out, do we have an issue out in the field? Do we need to recall product? And that's usually where I'm also saying, okay, slow down, stop, let's pause, get all the facts together, because otherwise you can easily make mistakes. There's misinformation, miscommunication across organizations. And before you know it, information's traveling to a lot of different people. And it's like, wait, no, we just got to get the facts and get everyone grounded, because everyone's starting to sort of panic, right, as information's getting out. And so I feel like the stakes have gotten higher with bigger decisions and bigger risks. But that methodology of just getting everyone on the same page, gathering the facts, and really being a clear communicator across organizations, both across and down, I would say the methodology still stays the same.
And I was lucky to witness that methodical approach during our capstone project. I had the opportunity to work with you, and actually hearing this from you in hindsight, actually I can connect the dots and actually understand like you better and your like leadership style and your approach better. So thank you for sharing.
It's interesting to talk about leadership styles too. How would you define yours? Obviously data driven, really analytical, but when it comes to the people, how do you think about that aspect of it?
I would say my general approach is as coach, especially as I've moved up. And I think that did take a transition, because when you are a scientist, you're very like hands-on and very little analytical, right? And I prided myself younger in my career as being a subject matter expert in some of these technical aspects. It took a transition when I took my first supervisor job, manager role, and moving up to sort of step away from having to be the subject matter expert. And so I think of myself more as coach, right? Just like if you're leading a football team or whatever it is, you may not be the quarterback or the running back or whatever and understand all the aspects, but you see how all the subject matter experts should move and function together to be effective. I try to really hold people accountable because they are really the subject matter experts. But I make sure we are aligning to strategy, prioritizing, allocating resources effectively. And that's really my subject matter expertise, right? Without being the technical expert anymore. And so I try to be that more removing obstacles, making sure people are, on the same page of where we're trying to go. So I would say that would generally be my leadership style.
Yeah, you could see it from you too, and we appreciate that about you. It is interesting though, there are a lot of challenges that come with being a leader. You talked about all the stress, the chaos, the multitude of facts versus fiction. What do you think is the biggest challenge for leaders today?
That's a good question. I think right now, one of the biggest challenges, is finding different motivation factors for younger generations. I've definitely seen this evolving over time. When I think about even my sister, my parents, a lot of my friends and colleagues who are at Abbott, AbbVie, still there 20-something years later. At one time, people, I think, were very motivated by stability, forward progress, the ability to have a 401k, maybe a pension even, et cetera. And as long as they were feeling provided for in that way, that was enough motivation, right, to feel satisfaction in their career. I think that has changed a lot, and especially as we see, in some ways our generation, but also younger generations, I think people are motivated by much different things. There's a concept of work-life balance. It's not just the money and the promotion, right? I guess is what I'm saying. There's work-life balance, there's flexibility, even for people who don't have, families. And so I think as a leader in organizations is how do you provide the right culture and opportunities that aren't some of those traditional motivators for people and keep people engaged and motivated and try to attract and retain talent, I think is something that'll be interesting to see how it evolves over the years.
Jen, it's interesting you talked about balance, so I'm going to leap a little bit forward. I've had the pleasure of meeting your wonderful husband and your wildly polite, smart, and talented children. You manage major operations for corporations, you're serving on boards, you're a member of many associations, and you're managing your household. How in the hell do you keep it all together, Jen? What is your secret superpower to make it all happen?
And I want to add one more thing. Kellogg Emba experience was really intense.
Yes.
She could also squeeze that into her busy schedule.
Right. How do you do it, Jen?
It's interesting. I actually get this question a lot because people always say to me, "You're so busy. I don't understand how you get this all done." But it's ironic. People see it as being busy. I actually feel like I'm very intentional about not being quote unquote busy in the sense that I feel like I'm really focused on where I'm sort of going and what I'm trying to achieve and what's really important and that I'm passionate about. But I'm actually very disciplined about saying no and cutting out things that are not those sort of theses, almost as if you will, theses on things that I'm passionate about and really care about. So a couple examples would be, one is pretty much every part of my day is usually mapped out. And so I think in some ways in operations, you're trying to work very efficiently, right? So I usually every night before I go to bed, I'm taking inventory of what are the top things I'm trying to get done career-wise or role-wise, and what are the things I'm trying to get done personally, right? Whether it's kids, filling out field trip form or whatever it might be. And so when I wake up in the morning, I've already sort of taken that inventory the night before. So I know when I start my day, I just quickly dig in and start crossing off the list. But if I know I have to make a phone call, et cetera, I'm kind of looking at my calendar and saying, okay, I'm going to be in the car for 20 minutes. That's the perfect time I'm going to make this phone call or whatever. And I'm really mapping out my day to be very strategic on what I'm working on for the day. But I think in some ways, that's just a microcosm of the overall big picture. Usually once a month, I'll do a check-in of where am I really trying to go and achieve for the year? And maybe 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and really making sure that every week I am making baby steps to get to those longer term objectives too. And if it doesn't fit within that, it's being cut, and it's a good way to sort of self-check and really make sure that I'm staying true to what's really important to me. I will say I don't do a lot of social media. I don't watch a lot of TV and movies because in some ways I definitely leave time for fun. That's just maybe not the things that I draw fun in, but I think sometimes that time can be lost, and again, it's like taking away from the things that are really important to you that you're trying to work towards. And so I try to be very mindful about making sure I'm not losing, time.
I think it's really interesting. You're maximizing your time and efficiency throughout the day. You're reflecting on that time. I think that's one of the things people actually struggle with, is taking a moment to take a step back and say, am I on the right path? Is this the right thing forward? Because oftentimes you get stuck just in the routine. I keep going. This is the thing I'm on. So when you have those reflection moments, what are the questions you're asking yourself? What are you thinking about? How does it change the trajectory of how you're going to move forward in all of your passion points?
That's a good question. And that is definitely something I'm very intentional about. Now, thankfully, I have a very supportive husband, which I should have also brought up, is my husband does do a lot of the heavy lifting in the house too. And he's very supportive of my career and just goals in general in life. So I usually go away on a weekend retreat, if you will. It used to be twice a year. I think since Kellogg, maybe about once a year. But I usually do that year check-in, usually around my birthday every year, and say, what did I really accomplish last year and what am I working towards? And I usually go up to Milwaukee. There's the same hotel that I go to all the time. And I really take mental note, like you're saying, of like, what am I working towards? So when we were in Kellogg, we had that time every other weekend, which honestly I miss. I keep telling my husband, can I secretly work out doing a once a month getaway and just have that think time, right? To really check in. And so for me right now would be something I'm thinking about as a future step. You mentioned board. So I am the president right now of the Kellogg Women at EMBA organization. That is something I'm very passionate about. And one of the things that's on my priority list is how to help make the path to senior leadership roles for women and, quite frankly, minorities too easier, right? So that is definitely where I spend a lot of my time. But I think with that, one of my future career goals is also getting more board membership. And so that step was something to give me experience, but also something I'm very passionate about. So it's sort of a win-win in a couple of different aspects. But those would be the types of things when I do my once or twice a year thing of like, okay, where am I wanting to go next, right? So initially it was maybe getting my MBA. Now it's board services. And what do I need to do to prep myself for board services? So experience, I've been thinking about getting a certification next year, but those are the things. And so week to week, and obviously there's a few in there, but week to week or month to month, it's like, am I taking those steps to get me to where I'm trying to go longer term? And making sure that anything that's not aligning to those, 8 or 10 overall goals are being cut.
It's really interesting. Someone once told me that you should stop the shoulds and focus on the needs and wants. So I should do this. I should do that, instead of I need to and I want to. And it's really reflected in our discussion right now that you are clearly on the want and need path and driven by your passions, which is pretty exciting.
Impressive. And speaking of Kellogg, what is the Kellogg impact on your professional and personal life so far?
That's a great question. I never imagined coming into the program that I would have the experience that I did. And I'm sure you too feel the same. One consistent thing that I heard from a few friends and colleagues that went through the program was Kellogg was not only great for their career, but also was transformational in life, both personal and professional development. And you hear that, I'm like, wow, it's weird everyone's saying that, but what does that really mean? But going through the program, it is such a true statement, and I'm looking at the head nods, and I think you feel the same. I came into the program thinking I was senior vice president, operations, reporting into COO. I came in thinking either I'd like to move into a COO role, or because I had been working for more startups, maybe I'll actually start my own company and try entrepreneurship. And those were sort of the two trajectories. But I think through the Kellogg experience, you're just exposed to so many new things. And part of it is keeping an open mind. Even if you feel like you're on a path, something else might happen that leads you down a different path. And just to be open to those possibilities is something that definitely resonated with me and being in the Kellogg journey. And I think a lot of people started there and then end up making pivots to things they didn't think they were going to do when they first started the program. And that experience was true for me too. But I think just being able to take risks, building confidence in yourself, following the journey and the path, were all things that I think Kellogg taught, all of us along the way. And I'm so grateful to have had that experience.
We are nodding. We are nodding and smiling with you because it's true.
Yeah.
And it really does transform you if you lean into it. But I think it's also leaning into all of life's experiences so that you can grow from all of them, which is pretty interesting.
Yes. I think also just the power of your classmates, they sometimes see you in different ways than you see yourself. And I remember a very key conversation that I had with a couple of our classmates when I was talking about the COO role that I was, thinking about. And two of a couple male classmates, which is, I think in some ways resonated with me even more, said to me, I'm surprised you're actually going for COO roles. I actually see you more as a CEO. And it's funny, just that one simple statement just made me think about things in a different way. I always thought if I went down the entrepreneurship route and became a founder that I would be the CEO, more because it's your idea and, you start that way. But I never thought about actually applying or thinking about a CEO role elsewhere. But I think that one statement made me think about other possibilities, not just even CEO roles, but other things like maybe I could start a venture capital fund someday. Maybe I could do a chief strategy officer. I think just seeing things in a different way or hearing things in a different way just made me realize there's a whole world of opportunities that I maybe haven't even been thinking about. And I'm going to use this time in Kellogg to really explore and see if it actually might be something else that I was, meant to do next.
You got to open up the aperture, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I would say your ability to reinvent yourself mixed with your courage. I think anything you decide to do, you can do it. And you can also have people behind like you and basically follow your vision and passion. So I just wanted to also add another data point to my Kellogg classmates. I truly think that this is the case in you, and seeing that has been really fascinating for me personally.
Yeah, I echo that
Thank
sentiment.
you.
Your courageousness is unmatched, unsurpassed. You and I were talking about this before we started recording. Like, taking risks is hard. It's hard. But you have to make sure that you know that it's not going to get any worse and it's not going to get any better unless you try. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like the bravery that comes from jumping.
Thanks. I think, especially as women, we are generally speaking less likely to take risks. I actually read this very interesting article by the woman who started Girls Who Code. And she actually talked about just differences in how students, hopefully I get this right, how students do coding and when they hit a roadblock, how they ask for help. And one observation she made was that, if a student raised their hand and said, hey, I'm stuck, generally speaking, if that student was a male, they would show someone and say, okay, I tried to do this, but I'm stuck and my code's not working. When it was a female student, they would delete everything that they had originally there and then say, I'm stuck, because they were too embarrassed to show their mistakes or errors of here's how far I got. They'd rather just have a blank slate and say, I don't know what I'm doing. And I thought that was just really, really powerful to me, because I think that shows in some ways the way we're just wired and maybe taught, boys can get dirty and it's fine if your clothes are dirty, but women, what I'm thinking about when I was growing up, it's like, you're in dresses and we're going out to dinner and like keeping clean and not being like dirty. And I think in some ways, those gender roles play out, and that maybe is not as much the case nowadays, but certainly sort of from my generation and older generations. And that has always stuck with me. And something that I really believe in is how to get women to get out of that mindset and not be afraid to take these risks. And I think in some ways, going through some experiences where the thing that you're most fearful of, if you actually hit that moment and you're able to get past it, it kind of teaches you, I'm going to land on my feet, because the worst thing that I thought was ever going to happen in my career or personally or whatever it is happened. And I'm still standing and I'm fine. And actually through that process, I came out much further ahead and I learned a lot from it. And you're not so fearful anymore. And hopefully, I'm hoping that's encouraging for more women to take, more risks and some leaps and try to go after those things that you wish you could maybe do and just don't try or are too scared to do.
I mean, I'm feeling totally inspired right now. So thank you for saying that. So Jen, this has been really inspiring for all of us. Thank you so much for being here. Honestly, I've learned a lot about you, despite the fact that we've known each other for 3 years now.
Definitely.
So every time we do these, it's amazing and fascinating. So thank you so much for the time. What words of advice and wisdom do you have to leave for our listeners?
I would say maybe building upon the risk taking, right, is try to always think of creative solutions. One of the things I always tell my team in a lot of ways in startups, I always encourage when someone's like, oh, that can't be done, right? Like, well, here's what we're trying to do, but it's just not possible. I always try to reframe it and say, but if we had to get to yes, what would it take, or what would this need to look like, right? Resources aside, money aside, what would it take? I think it allows people space to get creative and think outside the box and say, oh, wow, if I had to get to yes, like, I have no idea. But I'm like, but start thinking about it and laying it out. Now, ultimately, when we do that in business, that may not always be the case. You don't have, unlimited resources, you don't have unlimited funds, but it gets people just thinking. And I think whether that's solving a business problem or thinking about, risk-taking and career moves is like, if I had to make this move, if I really wanted to get my MBA, but I wasn't sure how, or I wanted to start my own company, but I'm not even sure, just what would it take? And just start mapping out baby steps to go along the way. I think just taking that first step is oftentimes just that little push you need to maybe, think about actually doing it and what it could look like and following your passions and dreams.
Jen, you are a woman of passion and possibilities, and it's been a true pleasure having this conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This has been great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you for diving deep with us on another episode of LEHI, Low Ego, High Impact Mindset. Join us every week as we discover the stories, strategies, and insights that will empower you to grow personally and professionally. Stay inspired and catch you in the next one.